Conference on Scope and Opportunities in Citizen Science. Before we proceed further, I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, who is also a member of the Conference Steering Committee, Pankaj Sekhsaria. Pankaj has been a long-time member of the Environmental Action Group, Kalparviksh, and is currently an associate professor at the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas at IIT Bombay. His research interests lie at the intersection of science, environment, technology, and society. He has a PhD in Science and Technology Studies from Maastricht University in the Netherlands and has written extensively on issues of environment, development, and wildlife conservation in India, with a special focus on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. He is also co-author with Naveen Thayil, who is also our plenary on day 4. Of the public report Citizen Science in Ecology in India, an initial mapping and analysis that was published in 2019 by the DST Center of Policy Research, IIT Delhi. Welcome, Pankaj, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshata, and a very warm good afternoon to all the participants at CITSI 2020. Welcome back again on day 2. I think it has been a very fascinating day and a half so far. We've had some lovely talks and the panels and the posters. So we have a panel discussion today, as Akshata mentioned, the first one on citizen science, scope, and possibilities for the future. We have a pretty exciting panel today, and a lot of us already know these people who are there on the panel today, but as a moderator, I'll take a couple of minutes to introduce each one of them, and then briefly lay out what I think we can do in the 1 hour that we have. I'm quite confident that 1 hour is not going to be, I'm sure that 1 hour won't be enough because of the panelists that we have and the questions we might want to discuss. But we'll open up some possible lines of discussion and concern for what might be citizen science going forward. So both in terms of what the possibilities are and the scope is, but how do we ensure that we're able to capitalize on those possibilities. So let me begin in no particular order. I'll just introduce all of them, like I said, and then I request one of them to start. So we have our first panelist, Krushnamegh Kunte, Associate Professor at the National Center for Biological Sciences, Bengaluru, leading a lab group on the biology of butterflies. He spearheads the Biodiversity Atlas, India Citizen Science Collaborative, and functions as the Chief Editor of Butterflies of India, one of the longest running modern citizen science platforms in the country. He has authored 5 books on Indian butterflies and published over 70 research papers describing new species and other aspects of biodiversity. And this is only a small introduction which will apply to all the panelists. We can't do justice in this time to all the work that they've done, but it gives us a sense of where they're coming from. Naveen Namboothiri, we've already heard him speak in the morning, a fascinating talk on his experience and initiatives in citizen science. Naveen is a founder trustee of Dakshin Foundation and currently serves as its director. He's trained as a marine biologist and has worked in diverse coastal, marine, and island systems across India. He leads the Biodiversity and Resource Monitoring Program and oversees the implementation of several marine conservation projects at Dakshin's field sites. And he spoke about some of these on the eastern coast of Tamil Nadu, in Lakshadweep, and the Andaman Islands. VB Mathur, probably everybody knows him, was at the Wildlife Institute of India for over 3 decades, including as director from 2014 to 2019. He is currently, for about a year now, a chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority. He joined the Indian Forest Service and topped the 1983-85 IFS professional course. He obtained his doctorate degree from the University of Oxford in 1991. He is currently the UN IPPS Bureau member and also the UN CBD Bureau member for 2019-2021. He has also been chair of the UN CBD Informal Advisory Group for developing synergies between 7 biodiversity-related conventions. And our fourth panelist, Kaberi Kargupta, is an interdisciplinary ecologist with a master's in wildlife biology from the Wildlife Institute of India and a PhD in anthropology from Arizona State University. She studied slender loris and worked as a senior research fellow in the forests of the Kalakkad-Munantarai Tiger Reserve in Tamil Nadu for about a decade. Her current research draws upon her training in multiple disciplines to study the ecology of cities and other places where people live alongside wildlife. She's also a founder of the Urban Slender Loris Project, a very well-known project in India and recently been written about in the media as well. She also founded the Urban Waterwise Landscape Project, a transdisciplinary collaborative project in California. I just want to also, the other thing that she mentioned, I think is important from the point of view of, so she says that she did much of her field work with a toddler in tow and has been an advocate for issues that affect women in the sciences, I think, which is a very important dimension of inclusion, of equity. And I think it's particularly important, I think, in line of some of the points that were made yesterday by Karen Cooper in her plenary, and also some of the issues that I think Naveen raised in the morning. Most recently, she received the Paul Sheheen Award for her contribution in public science from the COPUS, which is the Coalition on Public Understanding of Sciences. So needless to say, a very eminent panel. And besides the work that they have done in their respective fields, I think they're also, in some senses, leaders in the scientific community of the citizen science that's happening in India and what we're discussing today. So like I mentioned, I'll just take a couple more minutes to, since we have this panel on scope and possibilities, and we've had this little discussion with the panel a little earlier, I thought I will try and ask the question of all of us of what might be the future looking, going forward, in the sense that what might perhaps be issues that we are missing out, or the blind spots that we are looking at, things that we have not thought of, what we need to anticipate. Because if I remember right, there was a paper, 2014 paper, for instance, by Karen Cooper herself, which in the European and American context says that even citizen science is plagued by issues of privilege, where white, upper class, people from a certain class and background alone are able to participate in citizen science, even in the West. So what are the issues that might actually be that we need to consider? And this links up to 2 or 3 points I just like to pick up from what Geeta said in her plenary. She spoke about types of citizen science. One is contributory, there is the collaborative, and then there is the co-created. And she put her work in the collaborative kind of thing. So these are not trivial definitions or trivial descriptions. And also Naveen speaking earlier today of why do people participate, or what should people participate for in a citizen science project. So like I said, are we missing out something? Let me just throw up a few questions that we can then pick up in the conversation, and maybe each of our panelists could decide to pick up what they want. Issues of the nature of the citizen. Who is the citizen when we talk about citizen science? Because again, going back to Karen's discussion, she said how the category of the citizen has become problematic today in the American context, because it is about staking certain claims on resources and a certain status, for instance. What is the whole thing about science in this whole thing? Because a lot of critique of citizen science is that it is, kind of free or very cheap data that scientists are able to get because of the spatial and the temporal spread of the citizens. What about ethics, responsibility? We have citizen science for policy. We've seen that in cases where citizen science is able to help make decisions. But what about policy for citizen science? What might be the ethics involved, safeguards involved in people participating? There are questions of data ownership, data use. And I think a question that came up again is, how is this kind of citizen science that we are seeing today and describing today different from a community or a public science or public participation or different nomenclatures that we have seen globally, but certainly in the Indian context? So let me start with Vinod Mathur. Vinod, if you can tell us a little bit about, there is an echo. So maybe you can request the panelists to put off the mics maybe. Yeah. If you can tell us a little bit about your own interest in citizen science to begin with, and then perhaps you can reflect on a couple of these points. And the question I would like to specifically ask you is, why is citizen science so almost spectacularly popular today? Everybody is jumping onto that bandwagon. Why do you think that's happening? Vinod.
Thank you, Pankaj, for giving a very nice introduction and raising some very fundamental issues which are there in the context of citizen science. Now, we do have a mixed audience, people who are working with citizen science people who are citizen scientists themselves, but then there are people who may be new to this particular field. And interestingly, I did a little homework. I wanted to check that since when we have started talking and using the term citizen science and citizen scientists. And interestingly, my information indicates that it was as late as June 2014 that these words entered into the Oxford English Dictionary. So let me say how it defines that, because it will set the context of today's discussion. Citizen science is defined as a scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, often in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. So we are now talking of a relationship between scientific institutions and individuals. And then when we start looking at the citizen scientist itself, so who is qualified to be called as a citizen scientist? Is it a scientist whose work is characterized by a sense of responsibility to serve the best interests of the wider community? And then there is still a generic definition called a member of the general public who engages in scientific work, often in collaboration with or under direction of professional scientists or scientific institution, and basically an amateur scientist. So it is in this backdrop that this webinar is being organized, and I'm very sure that with the range of expertise available among the panelists and the participants, we are going to discuss and deliberate a range of what I would call as interrelated issues. Although Pankaj has flagged them, but we also understand that these issues are interrelated. Issues like data security often comes into mind, and so on. Now, I must also share with you, because we are talking to a conservation community at large, that very recently the Prime Minister's Council, it's called as the Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council, or the acronym is PM-STAC. It has decided to launch a new mission. The government feels that mission mode is better. And this mission is going to be on biodiversity and human well-being. And I'm very sure that these words of mine will be music to the ears of the conservation community, that never before in whatever 73 years of our independence, we ever talked of a mission on biodiversity. And this is now being talked about. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the National Biodiversity Authority, where I presently work, and of course, the big Biodiversity Collaborative based in Bangalore have been tasked with this responsibility of planning and implementing this mission. Now, as a mission will have different programs, but what is relevant for our today's webinar is that there is a program already built into this mission, which is on citizen science and outreach. And two of our colleagues, many of you would be knowing, Dr. Suhail and the other colleague which works with him, are responsible for working out the contours of this citizen science mission. So as Pankaj said, that there are different ideas, there are different areas, and I won't say that as of now the time is ripe for any conflict, but conflict may arise as we go along. Because whenever it comes to data ownership, data value addition, all those issues are going to come. So these are the kind of issues where we expect that although the citizen science component has been already developed into the mission, but the whole purpose of organizing these webinars is that we must seek out some new ideas, we must seek out areas of consensus and areas of disagreements.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to request you to take off your hat of the forest officer and the government servant and put on the hat of a scientist and a forest officer, and then tell us why do you think that citizen science is becoming so popular? What is the charm that the scientific community, if I might put it that way, is able to, why are we jumping onto that bandwagon?
Okay, let me give you then a little tackle it differently. As you have said, see, first is, who is a scientist? How do we define a scientist? And anybody who has got an opportunity to study science obviously calls into the definition of scientist. But let me tell you my experience at WII. I used to get letters from engineers, doctors, police officers, army persons, saying that they have never studied science in their life, or they were never provided an opportunity, yet they want to do something in conservation. So what can they do? And I was in a fix that in my scheme of things, if you have not studied science, you cannot contribute to science. And that is where this idea of opening the contours of science and what we are now trying to define as citizen science came in. And believe me, Pankaj, when I say that WI organizes a number of training programs for all target group, but we then initiated a program for wildlife conservation for the enthusiast. That was the title of the program. And the only qualification to be on the program was that you should have not studied science. You should have not studied wildlife science. But your interest, your enthusiasm is what is needed for. And in the 5 years that we ran that program, it is still running. We had large number of people registering and actually paying also. And we got wonderful results. These were the people who want to participate in data collection and read census operation. People have their own idea that when they want to contribute to conservation, that is one way that they can be involved in bird counting or butterfly counting or tiger counting or whatever. And we got some extremely good results out of them. Okay. So what I'm now trying to say that people on their own, and thanks to National Geographic and all the channels which are there, they create that interest, and then people wonder how they can contribute. To me, this is the territory which we have not targeted, and this is what we need to do. So I'll stop here, but wait for further questions and discussions as they come along.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think we've unfortunately lost the connection. With Kaberi is back. So Kaberi, were you able to hear the discussion? But your microphone is muted, Kaberi. So I'll come back to you. If you can unmute yourself, then we'll bring the discussion to you.
Pankaj, can I make a quick point? Just a very brief point.
I'm going to come to you. Yes.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the issues that I would like to highlight later. But one thing, based on your question and based on what Dr. Mathur just said, I will request everyone to perhaps avoid using this word bandwagon. Bandwagon has a negative connotation. And in my mind, I think the whole point of citizen science and the strength of citizen science is participation of citizens. And clearly everybody wants to participate not because this is a new thing. Certainly all citizens have realized that this is something cool that they could do. I suspect that citizens have always wanted to do that. But the scientific framework, the academic framework was such that they just could not participate. So I would be a little bit more inclusive in not calling it bandwagon, but perhaps just more recent popularity of these citizen science platforms and the technology which is allowing people to participate. So I would just put that as a positive rather than as a slight negative, that bandwagon just means that something is popular, but not perhaps for the right reasons. So I would just request everybody to maybe avoid that word and be a little bit more welcoming of new citizen science projects as well as new citizen scientists.
Yeah, and you can continue, Krushnamegh.
Okay, all right, fine.
We come to you, Kaberi. We'll ask Krushnamegh since he has the mic. If you want to respond to
go ahead.
Maybe briefly on your own experience, Krushnamegh, on citizen science, and then any other issue you want to reflect upon.
Absolutely. What I'll mention is that the whole Butterflies of India project started because Beginning from early 2000s, all sorts of new technologies were being developed. Internet was just new. Emails had come into existence just a few years before that. And Vijay Barve started this Yahoo group called Butterfly India. And a lot of data were coming in through that. And we could see that there was all this information which was not being properly archived and not being publicly accessible. So what we decided to do was to launch a website uh, uh, where we could compile all the data. So the seeds of this were really from that 2001, I think, was when the group was formed. And we launched the website in 2010. Initially, the progress was really slow, but as people started seeing how useful this is, people started asking, why don't you have a website on moths? Why don't you have it on odonata, dragonflies and damselflies? Why don't you have it on cicadas, and so on and so forth? So the success of this project, the Butterflies of India project, just helped generate more websites on other taxonomic groups. And our model has been that we identify some of the best people, some of the best taxonomic experts in that group, ideally young people who know how to use technology, all the internet related and group related stuff like Facebook, social media stuff, social media platforms. And we started identifying them as editors of these taxon based websites. And they are the ones then who own that project in many ways. They're the ones who give it direction. And that is how we developed from one website to currently 8 websites on different taxonomic groups, all animals so far. And now we call it Biodiversity Atlas India platform. So one of the main distinguishing features of this platform, and I hope that this is something that most other citizen science platforms will adopt, is the data quality. Every single observation that is contributed by both amateurs and professional biologists, non-biologists, whoever is contributing, is peer reviewed as rigorously as, let's say, data from a journal article, from a regular scientific journal article are vetted. And because of that peer review, all the data we have on the website is research quality. Now, in platforms like iNaturalist and eBird, ultimately there's peer review, but then who peer reviews it can be a little bit uncertain. And when people use the data, there may be a stamp of verified data, peer-reviewed data, but the quality of the data is still a little bit uncertain.
Yeah. Sorry, let me, in the interest of time, I think the point you're making is a very important one, but I think it also brings up a question of the idea of the expertise, and finally somebody holds the whole idea of democratization in that sense. And of course, expertise is important, but if it is finally held by somebody who already has the institutional power to decide what is right and wrong, I think that becomes an interesting challenge. But before I go to Kaberi, can you also very briefly in a couple of minutes just reflect upon what do you see the challenges going forward?
So the reason I mentioned this are 2 points, one of which is listed in the questions that you have circulated. And I wanted to give you this background to make that point. So the first point I wanted to make is data quality, which is highly uneven. Birds, perhaps it's the best among all the different groups that you see, because eBird has very strong peer review process after the data are made accessible. And the second point is ownership of data. So regarding the first point, I think the challenges that we have on citizen science platforms is the data quality, which is the whole point if you're going to use citizen science data for scientific research. And then who owns the data is related to how it is used. So if you look at all the publications that have come out based on citizen science data, I think the platform is acknowledged. iNaturalist is acknowledged, eBird is acknowledged, Butterflies of India or any other platforms are acknowledged, but the people who contribute are not really acknowledged in any way. There is no list of contributors whose data have been used, or on the platform there is no list of contributors that is easily accessible. So I think what citizen science platform should try to do is perhaps identify a consortium. For Butterflies of India, we call it Butterflies of India Consortium. But at least all the contributors are listed on one page. And I think we as scientists should agree that whenever we use data from citizen science platforms, even if we curate it, even if we add value to the data, that all the citizens who contribute data should be acknowledged as authors, at least as a consortium. And wherever possible, at least, let's say, the star contributors who have contributed a certain number of observations, for example. I think it's imperative that we honor and respect their contributions by acknowledging them directly in some manner. Without that, I think what the problem is that scientists still get away with all the credit for doing the science, and people who generate data are not really acknowledged. And
so
I think that's a big problem.
Let me put it more provocatively to you. One is that, so you're saying that today citizen science is, in the way it's happening in India or maybe globally, is not acknowledging the contribution of the citizen, by and large, is not contributing the citizen enough and appropriately.
Not in the final product that comes out, absolutely. I think as scientists and as a person who runs a platform, I think I feel guilty whenever I see papers, for example, where only the scientists who analyze data are acknowledged as authors. And I'll just give you an example to highlight this.
We'll come back to you, because we'll have maybe other interesting things that will come up. Thank you so much. We are going to be short on time, so we require a larger discussion. But thank you very much. Kaberi, would you like to step in and add something on your own, or perhaps also reflect on what either Vinod or Krushnamegh have said?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I was going back to Dr. Mathur beginning that when we were talking about what is citizen science and how, Dr. Mathur has said that it's from 2014 Oxford Dictionary, I think OUP, not OUP, the dictionary has the meaning of citizen science, a definition of citizen science. But I think it goes back long time back. The main citizen science work probably is more than 100 years old, as Karen has mentioned. And I have been involved with citizen science in the US for the past 10 years or so. So the very first Citizen Science Association meeting happened, or before even the Citizen Science Association was formed, the very first Citizen Science meeting happened in around 2011. Is part of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the Audubon Society, National Audubon Society's data collection, and then the public science people have been talking about what we should do, whether it's should be calling it participatory research or citizen science. Then 2012 at the ESA, Ecological Society of America's meeting, we had the first Citizen Science Association meeting where we all were there. 2015 when we had the second meeting, which was also associated with the AAA's, American Association for Advancement of Science. And then 2017, we started having the Citizen Science Association meeting in the US separately from any other organization and meeting. So what I'm trying to say here is that citizen science has been here for a long time, but the exact name of citizen science has been there probably for past 10 years or so. For me, I do work on different citizen science projects, and I founded few projects, and then I also collaborate with other people. So I have multiple different kinds. Some of them are participatory. It's co-created. For example, the Urban Slender Loris project is a co-created project with citizens. And then the the Water Wise Landscape project in California was a collaborative research project. But then I have other ones, the Farm to Table or the Chili project. Those are like using platform like iNaturalists, what Krushnamegh was saying. So for me, it feels like that citizen science, as Karen mentioned yesterday, that citizen science should not be just one type. And as Krushnamegh said, that we should not use the word bandwagon because it has the negative connotations. Also, the other thing I firmly believe is that citizen science should be about democratization of science. It should be about not just data collection. It should be about how do you engage communities in scientific research through understanding scientific methods. So a lot of our conservationists, for example, or environmental education groups, it feels like that we really don't know about how science works. And I think for me, that's how I started the work in citizen science, is because I've always found that's a challenge, that we all are interested in conservation or talk about conservation, whether it's in the US or here in India, but we really don't know how science works. And that's how, so if you look at my urban slender loris project, for example, I have spent enormous amount of time in actually making people, teaching them how science works. And then the other thing also is very important, is that not only just teach them about scientific methods and scientific research methods, but also listen to them. They have the knowledge, the scientific knowledge that we may not even understand or know, especially at local level. And I think if when you do co-create a project, a collaborative project, you have to have a very good dialogue or communication between the community members and you, whether it's you as a scientist. And but otherwise, I don't see the point of doing a large, citizen science project without that goal.
So in today's situation, Kaberi, what do you see as the main challenges for all of us who are interested in citizen science? And how does that link up to the future going forward? What is it that we need to look out for in people who are doing citizen science projects?
Several things, I think, but one of the main thing I find is challenging is funding. So if you can start a citizen science with volunteers. And what I noticed is that initial couple of years, people have interest. They would go out and do their work. They get very enthusiastic, especially if you try to spend time with them and engage them, engage the communities. But after a while, that interest goes away. And it's not just in India, it's also in the US. I have experienced with Fresno Bird Count, or the one here with our ESLP project. So I think we need to acknowledge that citizen science project requires funding. Without that, it's not possible. Whether it's community engagement or at a local level or at a global level, global scale. So that's one thing, is a big challenge. The other thing, I think also, we don't really have a whole lot of experience about how to do it. So I think it's important to develop a toolkit. Citizen science, various citizen science groups, including the Citizen Science Association in the US, have some toolkit. I think it's really useful for especially people who are trying to get into doing citizen science, whether you are a practitioner or a citizen scientist or a scientist. Try to follow or develop a toolkit which will be really useful for all of us to sort of make it a universal or uniform, more than universal, is uniform way of collecting data. And the third thing, I think, is evaluation. I think we need to understand how citizen science works. And in order to do that, or whether the project is successful or not, we need to continuously monitor our progress through evaluation process. And I think Karen had mentioned some yesterday about evaluation process. I think everybody should have a built-in evaluation in their project.
Thank you, Kaberi.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, there are lots of issues, and you highlighted some.
There are a lot more, definitely, lot more.
But I think the issue of financial sustainability from a more instrumental perspective and a more operational perspective is something I think a lot of citizen science projects are grappling with. And one does see that the long-term sustainability financially, but also we can come back to that. But there's a question that already came up saying that long-term studies, you cannot perhaps expect the same kinds of people or the same people to to contribute, because we might be talking of much long scales. So then there are challenges there as well in terms of ensuring that the data compatibility and things like that.
Exactly. So I think what is interesting from my own experience with just giving you an example of Urban Slender project, the project is still continuing, but it's gone on hiatus. The reason that it gone on hiatus is that we don't have any funding, and the funding is necessary for having a coordinator of this project. And it's because of technology, we have been able to do fantastic jobs. I meet with my groups with WhatsApps and everything. But as you said, that it's not static. The people move in and out of the project, right. And that's because they're all volunteers, or not even if they're not volunteers, even if you give them fund, some sort of compensation, but they do move in and out. And because of that, we need to have a coordinator who can actually get volunteers and have volunteers interested in the project.
Right.
So that's really important.
Thank you. Yeah. So let's, Naveen, can I invite you to please, you kind of told us about your work already in the morning. So
yeah,
would you like to pick up on some of the points that have already been raised, or in what I asked, or maybe something that you think is important has not been discussed yet?
Yes, I think, I missed Karen's talk, but I'm guessing what she also, from what you kind of summarized about what she highlighted as some points, the whole definition of citizens and science separately, I think that's a useful exercise to do. I say this only because it's really critical. I mean, just for this panel itself, I'd like to ask what comes to mind when you think of citizen. Who comes to mind, right? Who are these people when you're thinking of citizen science, and who do you think would come and engage in a project that is, I would say to a large extent, something that only a certain class of people in society can afford, to take time out to go and do this kind of activity, to be able to, engage. And also so that's the citizens part. And I think also with the science part, there are some basic questions that I think would be good to kind of clarify, because I mean, this is internally as an exercise for anyone who's starting any citizen science initiative, would be to also think of, science itself is, a couple of colleagues of mine, Karthik and Meera, had written a small article about how it can become a language in itself. So it speaks a certain language. It speaks the language of data. It speaks the language of, certain kind of curated data sets. You really can't say, include a data that is not collected in a certain way. It has to subscribe to certain, it has to achieve certain basic requirements for that data to be incorporated into it. So in a way, I feel that the language of science also is a barrier that requires to be, if this is to be like something that can reach out across all citizens in the country, across all social, cultural, economic kind of this thing. Otherwise, my only concern with citizen science, what are popularly called as citizen science initiatives, is that it should not go down as a crowdsourcing of data kind of an initiative, because I believe it has much bigger potential. It has a lot more it can achieve, and I'm glad to see that it's gaining a lot of momentum. But I think there are certain prerequisites. It's fine to say that my citizen science initiative is entirely about, I am interested in butterflies, ordinates, whatever it is. I'd really like people to come and contribute to this initiative. Whoever's willing to do that, please come and contribute. There are certain requirements. That's fine. So as long as you're very clear that your initiative is towards this, and as long as that's very open and transparent to the participants as well, that, hey, this is going towards a larger, scientific requirement. It requires, the people who are participating may be interested in butterflies or fish or, whatever other taxa that different people are looking at. But, and Kaberi also mentioned the problem with sustaining interest, right? And I think, how do we make, these kind of initiatives interesting for the participants as well? A lot of them, I'm guessing, volunteer for these programs with a certain understanding of what this will lead to, is that kind of mapping onto what the expectation of the, of the folks who've initiated these programs, do these map on? Are there conversations? Is there like ways for two-way communication of information and all of that? I think those are like really critical in designing it. It could be anything. I mean, it could be something that's as participatory as some of the programs work that we've done in Lakshadweep and other kinds of initiatives, which requires a lot of work, working with communities, trying to convey the concepts of why we are doing this, why do you need information in a certain way. And it's surprising because you actually get a lot of inputs from there as well. But then when you want to scale these things up, then local context really cannot match what is really the need of the people in a certain area in terms of their biodiversity interests and aspirations of what they want to achieve out of their engagements. I think that some level of mapping and transparency, and we need to discuss about also certain basic rules of engagement need to be put in place before this escalates to a big level, and then people might just, it shouldn't become that, okay, that's a citizen science initiative, whatever, man, they just get us to collect data, we're just glorified field assistants or whatever. I mean, it shouldn't go down that line. And I think for that we need to take these things into consideration and be very clear at the beginning. It's fine if you're participating in this, you're just contributing data to this. I mean, other than that, you get to go and see your butterflies, do whatever you want, but along with that, you're just giving us data. That's fine. As long as that's clear, I have no issues with that. But I think right now it's in that vague space of not having clarified those things upfront and well enough, and not having, and I think over a period of time that could become a problematic thing for well-meaning citizen science initiatives. So I think those things really and there needs to be some process to kind of the way we scrutinize data entry that come in. I think the same way we should scrutinize citizen science initiatives and make sure that there is not too much of expectations or promises being made in some of these initiatives.
Can I make a quick?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, great. So I'm just saying this is just warming up, and I think we have to be winding down in terms of time. I think a 1 hour panel is just not going to work. But I also had questions. But yes, maybe Krushnamegh can go first. But really briefly, please look at your watches and 30 seconds each.
Sure.
And then Kaberi, you, because we're 2:45 and we have to wind down. But thank you so much. But yes, Krushnamegh, please go ahead.
So the reason I brought up this issue of data ownership is precisely because of what Naveen just said, that if we are just using citizens as people who collect data, spatio-temporal data for us, I think it is going to have a negative impact on how people see it and how participate. But if we are more inclusive in both the ownership of data as well as use of the data, either by giving acknowledgement to actual contributors or listing contributors as either as consortium members or individual members, I think that will have a very positive impact in the long-term engagement of citizens in general.
Kaberi, please.
Yeah, I think it's Naveen brought up really good points, and some of it is, I think, depends on the objective or goal of your project and how you are designing it. So design is really, really important. For me, to develop a urban slender lorries project or urban waterways landscape project or the Chile project, all of those actually have a goal, a much larger goal. The goal is to actually engaging communities in science and conservation, and also a larger part is also about education, science education. So if you have that kind of goal in your mind, then you actually design a project based on how you can engage community members, right? So without that particular goal, without any particular goal, like any other projects, citizen science project is also going to fizzle out. Or you will have questions about who is collecting data and how they're collecting it, or what they're doing with the data ownership and questions like that. So I think, again, you have to be very, very careful and clear in your mind that what is your goal and what are you going to do with the data. For example, we have used our data for stopping some of the constructions in Bangalore city. And those would have gone through some of the natural habitats or habitats left in the city. So I think, you can use it in many different ways.
Yeah. Thank you, Kaberi. I'll just, we'll come to Vinod, but just a couple of things I might just want to, I've just been reading recently of the entire process of the datafication of science and of knowledge. And I was reading a paper quite by coincidence yesterday where this German Franzen, a German author, actually says that eventually even the human beings in this kind of, and in ecology might become irrelevant because technology will kind of get you all the data that you want. So then what happens to the citizen science? And the other issue, of course, is of policy, where we are talking, like Kaberi mentioned, of citizen science influencing policy. But have we thought about the kind of issue that might be required in maybe regulating or moderating or engaging with citizen science? For instance, what is the status of the citizen scientist contributing to a project? What happens in the case of an accident or in the case of a transgression or a trespassing that a citizen scientist indulges in or happens to indulge in while collecting data for a certain project, whether deliberately or otherwise? So I think there are lots of other questions that I think the discussions are there in the Western academia on some of this. But what really is the status of that citizen? A kind of different question to what Naveen was asking. But Vinod, can we ask you to kind of respond to any of the points that have happened? It's an open discussion now, and we're really running out of time. There are about 10 or 15 questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to take them here, but we'll try. And please do respond on a Slack. But Vinod, please go ahead.
See, Pankaj, I would like to echo what Kaberi just said, that the need for a citizen science toolkit. See, sooner or later, these questions that we have discussed are going to confront us. And the better we are prepared, it is good for everyone, because it will have policy implications, as you said. It will also have science implications. And I think for the take-home message for me, as we try to develop this program under the national mission, which has an upfront program under citizen science, is to look for the preparation of a toolkit. And certainly with the kind of expertise which is available, we can do that. It won't take months and months of effort. We just need to pick up the brains of a few people and then open it up for debate or discussion. But I think it would be very necessary that we prepare a kind of a toolkit which addresses, which raises these questions and then tries to answer that. And I'm very sure that at this point of time, people will be very willing to open up this field. See, many times it happens that the scientists themselves are very close on it, but the scientists themselves see a benefit. Kaberi has mentioned that one after another, she has been taking up these projects and she sees the merit of it. So there is already a give and take existing. And I am now very eagerly talking about incentivizing conservation. So not only for the scientists, but also for the citizen scientists. So he or she must be able to say that this is my value added contribution. This is how I do get recognized. And what is true for a scientist is also true for a citizen scientist. I don't think so that will be much difference. Maybe the intensity might vary, but by and large, we will be in our good effort to develop a kind of a toolkit. And that is what I'm going to do as we get along from the takeaways from this webinar. Thank you.
Now, the issue of incentive is a very interesting one, because central to a lot of the discussion on citizen science is the voluntary nature of contribution. So I think whether incentive is financial or incentive is recognition, I think it's a very fundamental, almost philosophical question that would need to be engaged with. Because if some kind of benefit is given, then does it change the nature of what we broadly understand as citizen science? So this is a question I don't think has an answer, but some people are thinking about it. And we just have a few minutes. I'll just take a couple of questions. And I think this one has been partly answered, but maybe it's an important question. This is from Robin for all the panelists. This question came very early in the panel. Do you think that in the enthusiasm for participatory science, so he's calling it participatory science, the involvement of citizens and with larger scale data, if some aspects of science, in quotes, his quotes, like study design, limitations of data are being ignored or downplayed? So would any of you like to take that up as trying to respond to what Robin is asking? I think it's asking whether we compromise on some kind of rigor. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I can talk a little bit about it.
But very briefly, Kaberi. Sorry.
Yeah, very briefly. Yes. I think the thing is, sorry, I lost my thought. Can you repeat the question a little bit?
The question is, okay, let me read it as it was read.
Yeah.
In the enthusiasm for participatory science, do you think that in the enthusiasm for participatory science, involvement of citizens and with larger scale data, if some aspects of science like design, limitations of data are being ignored or downplayed?
Oh, yeah. So I really think that it depends on what question you are asking, Robin. One of the main thing I think when you are starting a citizen science project is that you need to have a simple question. Not all projects, not all research questions can be answered or can be done by citizen scientists. And we do change our ideas, or we do change our techniques. I'm telling you from my chili project that I did not even realize that the chilies are so tiny flowers that it would be difficult for people to even, citizen scientists to do any observations of pollinators. So now we changed it, and I'm working with the Museum of Life and Science, trying to figure out what are the plants that are actually good for observation for pollinators by the citizen scientists. And it's I think we are also learning from them, because one of the questions, I'll tell you what the citizen scientists or participants in the project told us or wrote to us, is that what are the other insects doing? What the other insects are doing in the land, in the garden? Are they useful? What should we do with them? And this is not even related to pollinators. And that gave us a point to think about, that we should not just concentrate on pollinators, but also think about other insects or other things that are found in a garden or in a vegetable patch.
Krushnamegh, you wanted to say something?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
I think I completely agree with Robin that the study design and limitations of data are not being explained enough. And I'll add to that, actually, it's not just that those are being ignored and not specified. I think many of the platforms do not even address the issue of what sorts of data could come in and how it could come in. For example, if you have a website on butterflies, which is what I've done for the last many years, so I'll actually give you an example from that. Butterflies have very tight relationships with the larvalose plants on which caterpillars feed, and there's a narrow range of plants that caterpillars will accept. So on our website, we not only get spatiotemporal data on butterfly occurrence, we also have a module to upload images of caterpillars and eggs and pupae, but also images and information on the larvalose plants. So I think what gets lost in slightly bigger projects like iNaturalist is this fine biological question of what the animal does and what it's dependent on other life forms. For example, if we don't define that as scientists and as platforms, if we don't make those kinds of data contribution modules available, then we are going to lose on those important aspects. So spatiotemporal data are important, but we also need information on biology of organisms, and I think citizens can contribute that a lot. But for that to happen, scientists and people who run these platforms have to have this vision that we need data outside of just spatiotemporal occurrence. And I think because of that, we need to think a little bit more carefully about data structure, design of how data come in and are organized, so that we can go beyond spatiotemporal occurrence.
Great. I think we'll have to wrap up here. There is just one question, and I think that's a nice one to wrap up with, I think, as something to think forward in terms of structure. This is a question actually by Shardul, but we won't have time to respond. And Shardul asks, is it possible to create an umbrella under which all citizen science initiatives can come under? Because there are several repetitions. Example, for bird, there is eBird and Birds of India, etc., which may create confusion among people regarding where they should upload their data. So I'm not really going to, I don't think we can discuss that because we might fight. There might be a possibility of some fighting happening. But I think that's an important question. And one of the things that we might need to, all of us together, think about whether there is repetition or maybe there is value in repetition. I mean, that's one way also of looking at it. That may not necessarily be a problem. But clearly, I think in the toolkit that Kaberi and Vinod are saying, and this question from Shardul, it seems to point that maybe a larger structure of sorts of some kind for the citizen science community to come together on the lines of the associations that Kaberi is speaking about might be something that we could be thinking, and maybe this conference is perhaps one peg of that. I can see Naveen's hand. Are you raising your hand, Naveen, or just scratching your nose?
Yeah, okay. No, I'm not scratching my nose. So, Pankaj, no, I thought having listened to that question that Robin had raised, I think one other thing that needs to be thought through a little bit more in detail is which of these citizens in science, which of these are we focusing on in our initiative? Quite often, if your initiative is geared towards getting good scientific data, then your scientific rigor and all these points that Robin has raised need to take priority over, all the others. So you basically have to design your way that way. But if your initiative is to get citizen participation, get a lot more engagement around it, we're talking about citizen science in the conservation and ecological research space. And I think there you need to really focus then on making it, then you have to compromise on your scientific rigor. You can't have, I think the problem that a lot of people who are, initiating more citizen science initiatives with certain expectations in mind is that, one needs to think through which of this is my ultimate objective. If it's very rigorous scientific data, then you can't compromise on some of those, which means your participation might be limited because not everyone would be able to go and sit and observe, say, chili plant flowers at a specific time and all of that, right? That requires a certain dedication and all of that. So I think it's really critical to make that definition also very clear. Which is it that I as an initiator of a citizen science initiative, am I focusing on the citizens or am I focusing on the science part of it? And I think, in this group, I'm guessing, the science comes out very heavy, but there are lots of initiatives that are, the objective is not so much the data that comes out of it, but actually that creates so much of vibrant engagement with, ecological spaces, with different things, which is, I think, far more outweighs, in my opinion, far more outweighs, say, data collected for a specific, scientific purpose, right? So I think that way, that has, this is my personal opinion. It could be either way. I'm not saying this is right or that is wrong, but I'm just saying these things need to be factored in. Sorry, Ed.
No, sure. Thank you.
Can I just jump in again a little bit, Pankaj?
Yes,
I think what Robin was saying also is that this is like citizen science part 2 of our project. I know there are some projects which are actually doing much more thorough, complex data collection after having the basic data gathered by citizen scientists, and now they're doing experiments. And I can't remember the name of this project that I actually heard some of them talking about it in the citizen science meeting last time. Was people are actually doing experiments. Citizen scientists are doing experiments on different stuff, and those are pretty sophisticated experiments. We are actually planning to do a lot of ecological data, social behavior and behavioral ecology data collection with slender lorries. That is again going to be with, hoping to do with citizen scientists. So it's like part 2. First part is to actually get some basic data.
I think also underlying Robin's question perhaps is a certain skepticism or perhaps a provocation. The very fact that he is in that way. I'll just again point two very interesting things. That is one question about the relevance of traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge in this whole framework, which we have not discussed at all. And how does that fit in? What are the challenges? I think that's a question for all the panelists, which is there on the in the question list. And the other one that perhaps we can think of is also, I think, of what happens to the old practices and traditions of public science programs, and whether they are very different from the current citizen science, and how could perhaps one transition from the old ones, where there has been large-scale community participation in science projects and science processes, and whether there's a great amount of difference to what is happening now. So I think we will have to wrap it up. Naveen, sorry, it's 3. Like I said, it's 1 hour is just not enough for this. We need a larger time span, and maybe we need more panel discussions of this kind. I think it's been quite fascinating for me, very, very thoughtful and provocative. Thank you very much, Krushnamegh, Vinod, Naveen, Kaberi. There's a whole set of questions. There are almost a dozen questions that have come up. They must be on the Slack channel. Akshata has been putting them in a Google Doc. Some of them are addressed to individuals in the panel. Some of them are addressed to the entire panel. So we can figure out a way by which you can look at it. Please do respond to them on the Slack channel itself if you can. This is a request to the panelists because then that kind of adds to the discussion and the contribution, and people who've joined us will also have some feedback, and there could be a conversation out of that. So let me thank you again very much for your time and for your insights and for all what you've said. And maybe this is just the beginning. We need to do a lot more. So
thank you, Pankaj. Yeah.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing this. I really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
I just hope that with this conference and others, we will just be able to blur this distinction that Naveen made, that there's citizen projects and data projects, and maybe get a community to a level where there is no distinction between those two kinds of projects, because the community is going to get better, more educated in terms of nature and species. So I just hope that this will lead to that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for all those who've been attending. Hopefully it's been very interesting and productive. Thank you, and bye-bye.